Hey, this is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page, and it's January 1st, 2020. Happy New Year. So I've been doing a series of videos on the Churches of Christ, and a couple days ago I did a video on instrumental music, and that's a topic that brings up a lot of questions, and even to some extent to a great extent causes a lot of division. So here's what I want to do with this video. You see the title of the video is about church buildings and instrumental music. And so in response to this video that I did a couple of days ago, I got a question, and the questioner is someone who I've had discussions with before via Facebook and through Facebook Messenger, but I want to read you the question. I'm not going to mention a name or anything like that, but it's a good question in a couple of ways. And so anyway, I'll just read it to you and go from there. I'm going to present to you a question that is interesting to me, and it goes like this. When the scripture says not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together, Hebrews 10:25, that would probably presuppose that you could build some kind of structure to meet in, even though there is no command to build a building, correct? Same way with singing in an assembly. When the scripture says to sing, would that not presuppose that there were instruments involved and that centuries ago it was not considered to be a bad thing? Just a thought I had. Appreciate an answer if you want to. So a couple of things in regard to this question. Number one, it's a good and legitimate question, and anytime a person has a question about a Bible topic, it's a good question. But one of the things that stands out to me about this particular person and this question is attitude. And that goes a long way with everybody. It goes a long way with me. This person, and we had a conversation beyond this one question, and we've had conversations particularly through Facebook Messenger before this question. But one thing that I see in this person is honesty. This person wants to know from the Bible what the answer is to any question. This person came out of denominationalism, and we discussed that. To an extent prior to this question. But one thing that you see, particularly on social media, and you don't see it so much in face-to-face interaction, but when people aren't face-to-face, and I've addressed this before in previous videos, people have a lot more courage when they're not right in front of you. They're miles away or whatever. They'll be very bold and brave, and they'll say things that they normally wouldn't say if they were face-to-face. They'll be rude and abrupt, unkind, whereas if they were face-to-face, they probably wouldn't say anything at all because they don't have the courage to do so. But like I was saying, this person I've dealt with on several different occasions. It just seems to be a good person, a kind person, and wants to know what the Bible has to say. Hey there, Connie. Good afternoon to you. Hope your day is going well for you. So again, I appreciate that question. And again, it was in connection with the video that I did the other day in regard to Churches of Christ and instrumental music. And I also want to say one thing. Well, I'll say that later in the video, so I won't say it right now. But so again, basically, so we're commanded to assemble, therefore, church buildings. Is it the same to say we're commanded to sing, therefore, instrumental music? Let me close this out here. So, is it the same thing in fulfilling the command to worship, to assemble together? Is it the same thing for us to construct a building to fulfill that command as to the command to sing to include instrumental music? Are those things parallel? Are they the same thing? So first of all, let's deal with the command to assemble and the necessity of somewhere to assemble. We see that early on with the church in the book of Acts. Beginning there in Acts chapter 2, we see that these people met day to day. And one thing that we read about them recorded in Acts chapter 5 is they went They met from house to house. And that's an interesting thing that we see in the New Testament. And I've got my Bible open here. Just for example, you didn't have church buildings in the first century. And that's something that we need to understand. So a couple of examples here. One being 1 Corinthians 16, verse 19. Paul writes there, "The churches of Asia greet you. Aquila and Priscilla greet you heartily in the Lord with the church that is in their house." So they had you might say, they hosted the congregation. They hosted the church in their home. Another example of that is over in, Colossians chapter 4 and verse 15. It says, "Greet the brethren who are in Laodicea and Nymphas and the church that is in his house." So this is the pattern that we find in the pages of the New Testament. Now, here's one thing we need to understand. There are some who take the position that it's wrong for a congregation to take funds and to build a church building. They believe you should meet in a home, and I guess part of that position is because if you build a building, then you have to take money. You have to pay for electricity. You have to pay for typically water. You have to pay for insurance, and basically the argument is, well, that's a waste of money. That's a waste of church funds, and you shouldn't be doing that. Well, the fact of the matter is this: the church is commanded to assemble. And again, the questioner, the person who sent me this question, referenced Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 25, where the author there was condemning the attitude of some. Some Christians were forsaking the assembly. All a church building does is it facilitates, it helps fulfill the command of assembly. Just for example, here at Mammoth Spring, we might average 140 to 130. I don't know anybody who has a house that could facilitate that. You could put up a tent. Somebody might have a shop building somewhere. But what a building does is, number one, it facilitates the numbers. It gives us the ability to have 150 people, give or take a few on any given occasion. But also in a local community, it identifies where the Lord's church meets on the first day of the week or on a Sunday. So it accomplishes a couple of different things. Now, here's the difference. And again, the question of, is it the same thing to build a church building to assemble as to include instrumental music to help fulfill the command to sing? Building a church building does exactly that. It facilitates assembly. It allows Christians to observe that first day of the week assembly to worship. It doesn't change anything. It's Christians getting together. And I've said this here before at Mammoth Spring. If our physical structure were to burn to the ground, the Mammoth Spring Church of Christ would still exist. The church is not a building. That's all this is. This is just a building where we meet, where we gather together to worship. That doesn't change anything. It's just a structure. The difference is the command to sing is just that. And the video that I did a couple of days ago, I don't remember exactly what day it was, whether you're looking in the three particular passages that I pointed out, Ephesians 5:19, Colossians 3:16, and Hebrews 13:15, all talk about singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Hebrews 13:15 specifically mentions the offering up of the praise of our lips. We know then what the command is. It's to sing. We know what's to be sung, psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. We know why the singing is done. Paul said there in Colossians 3:16, teaching and admonishing one another. When you add an instrument to that, you fundamentally change what's being done. That's the difference. You go from singing, which is commanded in the New Testament in multiple places, you go from just singing to singing and playing. You have fundamentally changed what you are doing. Building a structure somewhere for a church to meet, to assemble, doesn't change what's being done. Again, the word I've used a couple of times now is it facilitates the assembly. It allows a larger group of people to get together and to worship in song and in the Lord, observance of the Lord's Supper and all these things that we do in worship. It doesn't change anything. But when you add something to a command, and we don't have to just talk about singing. We could talk about the Lord's Supper, and I think this is a good example. I also have done a video in this series on why the churches of Christ partake of the Lord's Supper every first day of the week. But we noticed in that video what happens. What's being taken? Well, it's just like what Jesus established there, as recorded in Matthew 26, Mark 14, and Luke 22. You have unleavened bread, and you have the fruit of the vine. Now, we have a church building that allows us to come together on the first day of the week to, among other things, to partake of unleavened bread and fruit of the vine. Now, you could do that outdoors. You could do it under a tent. You could do it in a church building. You could do it in somebody's house. That doesn't change what you are doing. Now, if you were to add, whatever to the unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine, if you were to add Coke, if you were to add potato chips, you are fundamentally changing the elements of the Lord's Supper. And in doing so, you would be sinning. It's like Paul said there, when Paul was discussing this over in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, the partaking of the Lord's Supper, he says, "For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered unto you." He received this revelation from the Lord himself. And so to have anything different in that would be to change what he had received from the Lord. And the same thing goes with singing. The commandment that we receive from the Lord through his word in the pages of the New Testament is to sing. When I add something to that, whether it be a piano or a guitar or a drum set, I have fundamentally changed what's being done. Again, I'm no longer just singing, I'm singing and playing. And it's interesting when you look at these practices that involve instrumental music. A lot of times I don't know how else to say this, it's more of a concert atmosphere where you have a select few playing, a band playing, or whatever you want to call it, and it's almost turned into a source of entertainment for those in the crowd. And you have changed what you are doing from singing to singing and playing. And when you do that, it is a sin. It would be just like adding, like I said earlier, instead of just having unleavened bread and fruit of the vine in the Lord's Supper, if you were to add Coke and potato chips, you have sinned because you have added to what God told you to do. Building a church building is not an addition to anything. It's just an expedient. I guess that's the appropriate term to use. It's an expedient to help us assemble. It doesn't change the assembly, which is the command to be done. I want to read a comment here. I do believe that too much money can be spent on a building. It goes from being a place to assemble to a show place, and that can become sin. And that's a great comment. That's absolutely true. And I can't argue with that. There's nothing to add to that. That's a very true statement. But the existence of a building is a building in and of itself for the purpose of an assembly is not sin. Performing, yes, yeah, and that's a great point. Christianity, and I'm using that term loosely, very loosely. It seems that worship in Christianity has turned into a performance. In fact, the other day when I was talking about singing and instrumental music, that one of the arguments that's made in favor of instrumental music is, well, I have this talent, and God would want me to show this talent. I can play this instrument so well, and I need to do it to His glory. And if you're going to stop me from doing that, then you're just that's not right. Well, yeah. So in many cases, worship has become, in essence, a performance, and that's not what it's about. So when you see these commands, again, to sing, so think about this. So we're commanded to sing, and I'm just thinking here. So I've got here, okay, right here in my library, I've got a songbook. So if you got 150 people gathered together in a church building, and there are some songs you want to sing. How are you going to do that? And what I'm getting at here is some people say, well, a songbook changes what you're doing. Some people make the argument, and I know people who have seen song leaders get up and lead a congregation, maybe they'll use a tuning fork or a pitch pipe. I got those two confused one time, and I talked about a pitchfork. You don't want to lead singing with a pitchfork, but maybe a tuning fork or a pitch pipe, and they say, well, that's instrumental music. Well, no, it's not changing. You can get the tune in your head, in your ear, and in the congregation's ear, but it's not an instrument that is in addition to the singing that's going on. And that's the same thing with a songbook. A songbook can get everybody on the same page, literally get you on the same page, so you know what's being sung, you know what's being done. And so some of these arguments that people make, like, well, a songbook is different, it adds to it. No, it doesn't. It's a songbook or a pitch pipe would be just like a church building. It facilitates a command that's been given. It helps us to sing. It doesn't change the singing that takes place. It doesn't add anything to the singing. It's just a songbook, just puts the words and the notes there for you so you can follow along and participate. And here's another interesting argument that I've heard before, and maybe those of you who are on here have heard this, that four-part harmony is a sin. Well, four-part harmony is just singing. Alto, tenor, bass, soprano, it's just singing. It's different voices. Males and females are different in their voice, and even males can differ in the depth of their voice or the range that they have. You've not changed in singing four-part harmony. You've not changed the fundamental command to sing and make melody in your heart to the Lord. But again, when you add an instrument to the singing that's going on, you have fundamentally changed what's being done. So we have to, and I guess one of the things that should precede a study like this is, how does the Bible authorize? How does biblical authority work? If a person doesn't have a good foundation in Bible authority, then they'll make statements like, well, a church building is sinful. Or they'll say something like a songbook is sinful because it's an addition. It's not an addition to singing. It doesn't change singing or anything. In fact, it's a help in doing that. Instrumental music is not a help. It's an addition to the command to sing and make melody in your heart to the Lord. It's in addition to teach and admonish one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. We have to be able to understand the difference. So I've been going about 20 minutes here. I'm going to wrap this up. And I'll wrap it up in this way. Building a church building to help a local congregation assemble together upon the first day of the week, and I guess for that matter, any other time that an eldership decides they should. Doing that is not the same thing as adding instrumental music to the command to sing. Those are, as we say, that'd be comparing apples and oranges. It's not the same thing. One helps something else be done. A building helps the assembly. Another, the instruments, changes what is being done. It changes from singing to singing and playing. Okay, so one person makes the comment, usually when someone nitpicks like that, they are just, they're wanting to justify using instruments. That's true, I would say, to an extent. I would say also, though, that's just, when a person makes an argument like that, it's not thought through very well. Jesus, when you look at the teaching of Jesus, when you look at Paul and Peter, when you look at the writers of the Bible, they're very logical. Their teaching is not based on emotion. It's based on God's revelation. It's like Jesus said in John 17:17, sanctify them through thy truth, thy word is truth. There's a standard, and the standard of truth is not my emotional response to something. It's what does God have to say about it. And so I appreciate all of you who have come on here today. And again, like I said, and I think this is so important, and so I'll mention it again. When I got this question, I appreciated the the attitude that was behind it. And like I said, we had a discussion on it over Facebook Messenger. And like I said, I've had several, I guess you'd say, questions and answers with this particular individual. And it's always respectful, and we always look to the Bible for the answer. And that should be the way every discussion is in terms of the Bible. Polite, respectful, but my answer needs to come from the Bible, not what I think, not what I feel. And so many people in religion, they depend upon their feelings and their emotions. And again, the old, well, that's just how I was raised, tradition, family tradition kind of thing. That's my tradition is not the standard in truth, and neither is yours. So again, I appreciate all of you who are on here, quite a few on the live stream today and on New Year. You should be watching football or something, not me. I should be watching football. But anyway, I appreciate you watching the video today. And as always, like and follow our page here, Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring. I also started a new page a couple of weeks ago for the Fulton County Gospel newspaper that we publish and mail out here from Mammoth Spring. Check out that page, like and follow it. And as always, if you ever have any questions or comments about anything I say on here, add it in the comment section, send me a private message, and I will always respond to those. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next video.